Welcome again to Lighthouse Sea Fishing Tutorials. For this installment of our mini-series on how to catch bass, we will be covering tips on how to catch them from estuary marks. We'll first very briefly cover where the estuaries that typically hold bass can be found. We'll then highlight some of the best conditions within estuaries that will give you the best chance on the day. We'll then talk about some of the typical spots within the estuary bass are most likely to be. Finally, we'll discuss some of the go-to rigs you can use, as well as some of the baits that the bass will likely be feeding on. So let's start with a brief rundown of where the estuaries will be that hold bass. Bass are found all around the UK, but are more prominent along the southern and western stretches of coastline. They are caught along a large stretch of the European continent, from southern Norway and throughout the entire Mediterranean, even reaching into the southern Black Sea and beyond the Suez Canal into the Red Sea. They are not as of yet found in the Baltic in any real numbers. So which kind of conditions within the estuary are we looking for? School bass of around the 2-pound mark can be found around the UK all year around, as these are juvenile fish and do not spawn. Adult bass stay deeper offshore in localized locations when spawning around late wintertime. There are exceptions due to varying temperature year by year, but these adult bass first start to return usually around late March in places like the English Channel and the Bristol Channel. Mid-April is the typical time that bass will return for the slightly higher latitudes of Wales and the southeast max of the North Sea. By the end of April, the coasts of Suffolk and Norfolk will typically see adult bass returning. It won't be until May that they'll be found in any number in the north of the UK. For any venues in the north, the seasonal range that they will stay for will be shorter, seeing them typically leave by October. They can, however, be caught all the way up to Christmas in the southern parts of the UK. Peeler crabs are one of the main reasons that bass will frequent estuaries between early spring and June. By the time May arrives, they will also be feeding readily on fish species such as sand eel, flatfish and small fish species in general. In terms of tide, the best tides are typically considered the middle-sized tides, leading up to the next spring tide. As ever, this will be weather and venue dependent. If you need a better understanding of this, we'll make sure to provide you with a link to a video on tides at the end of this video. The larger bass will come into smaller estuaries to feed in rougher weather, though they can be present even in calmer conditions. During times of heavy rain, estuaries will become brackish or acidic. During these times, bass will likely avoid estuaries. Night tides tend to be the best tides for bass, though they can be caught in the day too. In clear water they'll likely be feeding in mid-water, but if the water is cloudy, they will be grubbing around, with their head down on the bottom. Any tide where the low phase falls during the hours of darkness will bring bass into the estuary more confidently. So, what about the features within an estuary? Where should we be aiming for? Bass will wait at the mouth of the estuary until after low tide, then begin moving through the main channel on the flood tide. When they patrol this main channel, they will visit features such as rock beds and shellfish beds. If there are structures such as piers and breakwaters present in the estuary, bass will also visit this kind of structure as they pass through. Estuaries typically have drainage channels that flow into them from the marshland around them. Bass will hunt for crab and fish inside these channels. Fishing with crab on the inclines of these channels close in at night can prove effective. At night, the same applies to the main channel. Casting close in near areas of rock beds near the shoreline in shallow water can put your bait where the bass will be scavenging close in for food. Weed beds are another regular feature that bass will visit, hunting for hiding or feeding bait fish, along with crustaceans and other creatures. Anywhere within an estuary where there is a bottleneck present will help concentrate the paths of swimming bass. The bottleneck can also aid current to dislodge creatures such as sand eel, which may be present in the seabed. Bass will drop back along the beach during the ebb, as water flows back out the estuary. They will concentrate on swimming the main channel to avoid being cut off. As the water flows out, look for areas of surf, which indicate shorebed structure, such as sandbanks, breaking the flow of the water. It's the outer, water side of sandbanks that they are likely to be when patrolling through on the ebb. Let's now show you guys a couple of the go-to rigs that anglers typically use to target bass. One of the most commonly used rigs for bass fishing is the single hook clipped down rig. The rig can be clipped down using the bait clip to aid you in your distance casting, though remember, bass won't always need distance casting to reach them. When it comes to the snood, it pays to use a longer snood of around 20 inches. As for bass, this presents bait effectively. Strength-wise, it makes sense to be prepared for hooking a potentially large specimen, so anywhere between 18 pounds to 30 pounds for the snood is a sensible range to aim for. But again, how you set up your rigs can depend on factors such as the venue and the conditions, as well as simply personal preference. A good memory-free line can be suitable for snoods, though many anglers use fluorocarbon, as this could present baits more naturally in clear water, what with the bass being a very visual predator. For cloudy waters, or even for night fishing, if we want to target bass while they are feeding on the bottom, it makes sense to use a rig that will present our baits low. There are numerous rig choices for presenting baits low, but the pulley rig will work well for this. Also, as ever, pulley rigs will be very suitable for avoiding snags, especially if you plan to cast near features like the rock patches that we mentioned earlier. Finally, let's take a look at some top bass baits. Peeler crab can be used all through the year, though during their seasonal peeling range from spring onwards will be the ideal window to use them. Remember to try aiming crab in close at night, for those drainage channels and rock patches we mentioned earlier. Sand eel can be used especially around sandbanks and bottlenecks where the bass will harry them against any strong tides present. Fish strips of baits such as mackerel or bluey can be good to use later in the summer and into autumn, as can squid and worm baits. After a bit of rough weather, matching the hatch and using shellfish baits such as razor shell or mussel may be worth a shot. As bass and other species change their feeding habits during different water conditions, if you would like to know how to predict if water will be cloudy or not, check out the link on watercolor showing now. There is also a link that will also help you gain a better understanding of tides. We also have dedicated video on how to target bass from rock marks, showing now. Thanks so much again for joining us for another edition of Lighthouse Sea Fishing Tutorials. Until next time.